Hello, hello, hello to everyone. This is Laddick. I'm coming to you live from on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube. We are here with another eLearn Hotseat. It's brought to you by OpenLMS, which is a company I work for, my colleague Christian works for. And I want to welcome everybody. If you are listening to us today, I hope that you'll contribute and participate, but we'll see. My guest for today, fantastic individual, Rick Lozano. There he is right there. He's now on the screen. Rick, you and I, I'm gonna be honest, like everybody with everybody, you to me, and our connection came from Britt Andrietta, who's one of our favorite speakers. She absolutely kills it, and was on the stage with me for the eLearn Success Summit the previous 2 years, one of our top speakers. So obviously I have, like, my expectations are like way super oversized, fantastic. But as we usually get started here, why don't you give everyone the 60 seconds of who you are, what you do, and we'll go from there.
Cool. Well, hello, and everyone. It's great to see you virtually across the world. Laddick, thank you for having me on today. So yeah, I'm Rick Lozano. I've been working in leadership and talent development for over 20 years. My primary focus these days, I work as a leadership consultant, do a lot of keynote speaking work. I wrote a book lately called Acoustic Leadership, Develop a Leadership Culture That Resonates. And I think something unique about me is that I bring music to the work that I do. And it's the source of inspiration and connection for me. And it's a ton of fun. And and thanks to Britt for connecting us. I love Britt. She's absolutely fantastic. So anyone watching this, Britt Andrietta, her books are fantastic. She's a great speaker. So check her out too.
Yeah, for sure. And I love it. If you go to ricklozano.com, one of the things that I love about it is that, you've, the videos of your previous speaking gigs are there, and I can only imagine what happens at a corporate event or whatever, when a dude comes out in sort of your typical blazer and a nice button down, but then you're like, oh, by the way, I've got a guitar.
Yeah,
that's right. It sure strikes fear in the heart of everyone.
It's funny you say that too, because I do think that there's those mixed reactions as well. And I remember one person, I spoke to him after a keynote that I did, and he said, I saw the guitar and I instantly was like, oh, this is going to suck. I said, really? And he said, but then you totally engaged us. It changed my mind, but I was really worried at first that it was going to be cheesy and hokey. And it was like, I'm glad that you said that, because I don't want to do that. And I've always got to be mindful of how to do it in such a way so that it's not cheesy and hokey. But it's funny. I think it's a distinguishing factor that 90% of people love. And then there's that skepticism from the other 10 that I've got to find a way to, get on my side of things. So, it works most of the time.
So take me to leadership development. I just want to touch on this first before we go into what our real the conversation for the day is like, when you and I first started talking a couple months ago at this stage, I was really interested in the conversation about why is leadership important in the higher ed corporate L&D space. Give me your couple of bullet points about where do you take them, especially with acoustic leadership, and that model, and saying, how is this, and specifically, most people are talking about how education and learning has changed over the last 24 months here with the pandemic. Give me your thoughts on that.
I think one of the first things that is really, really important to realize is that people in the corporate education, talent development, learning and development space are seen as leaders, whether or not they have an official title. When we have facilitators and trainers in the front of a room, for example, even if they don't have the manager credential, they are leaders. They're leading an experience. And I think one of the things that needs to be made very well aware of in that context is people need to realize that they're on stage and that people are watching everything they do. And we know this, for example, as trainers, as instructional designers, we need to model the skills that we expect people to learn. But it's also really important from a leadership perspective to go, oh yeah, I am a leader. I need to step up to this plate because I am influencing other people. I think a lot of people in our work as well are responsible for onboarding programs, orientation programs. We are, in many cases, the faces of the company. And we need to realize that responsibility and step up to that. A lot of the book was based on the fact, or the thought around the book, a lot of it was, we've got leaders everywhere in our organizations, with or without a title. People are leading anyway. So number one, we need to be aware of that. personally, right? I need to know that I'm being looked at as a leader, and I need to make sure that I'm acting accordingly. And then B, we need to give people the opportunities to develop as leaders.
Mm.
And one of the things that I traditionally hated about L&D was we would have closed programs. Only managers can attend this program, right? So we would say, if you don't have a manager title, you can't get into this training. And I realized that there's some reasons for that, right? We want to create a safe environment where managers can practice new skills. Absolutely. But we've got leaders in our organizations who aren't managers. They're leading anyway. How are we developing them? And if we're not putting some effort and focus onto them, who knows what sort of things we might be dealing with. So we have an opportunity to open the door to more people into our development programs. And yes, we can still maintain a safe learning environment. Absolutely. But I think we can invite more people to that conversation.
But do you think that, kind of two thoughts there? One, this is just my personality, as a classic small business entrepreneur myself, from going on 20 years now, titles and things like I'm a manager or I have like those, I don't want to say I'm allergic to them, but they make me rankle, because I'm just like, hey, wait a second, like, I want to solve that problem. I want to break out. I want to push. And so that's me, but I'm also thinking the you can do it, break the mold. I mean, that has just become the sexy topic, the sexy professional persona of the day, right? These are the people in the news, the disruptors and those kinds of things. Does that resonate with you as well? And in terms of across, like, because again, I agree with you. We need to have structure. There needs to be division of labor. We need to have those things 100%. But then how do we blend those two?
That's a great question. And I completely feel you, because I'm that way too. I've always been a little bit of pushback and a little bit rebellious, if you will. I think one of the things that will really help a lot of people is to realize, okay, leadership doesn't have to be this scary formal thing. What it can be is an acknowledgement that we all influence people, whether it's as a teammate, as a coworker, anything like that. I think the best thing that we can do to this conversation is to say, look, I don't need to fix you. I need to focus you. I need to help you be more effective, bringing to life the things that you're already great at, the things that you do naturally. And I think, in my career, when I have felt the most resistance was when people were asking me to do things that either just didn't come easy for me, or that just flat out didn't apply to my personality, my style. And I felt like I was swimming, upstream. The best things that I've done in my career is when somebody said, hey, here's these small sets of things that you're awesome at. Do those things. And in doing those, not only will you be more productive and engaged, but from a leadership standpoint, you're going to be more influential. People are going to look up to you because they see you, operating in your zone of excellence. And I think that's a conversation that we could have. So don't focus on fixing people, focus people.
Ooh.
Focus, you don't fix. How's that?
Let's allow ourselves to focus and forget about fixing. Awesome. I want to remind everybody, we're live right now with Rick. And if you're listening to us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube, please do put a comment in any of those platforms. We do see them. We'd be happy to interact with you, respond with you. If you're listening to the recording of this as well, you can always still put your questions or comments in there. We do see them. We will, and we're happy to get back with you. We love that. Yeah. I also want to remind everyone that this is the type of conversation that Rick is the type of individual that we have on the stage, or we will be having on the stage at the eLearn Success Series. Our first session in the eLearn Success Series, which is the designer session, is coming up. Oh my gosh, it's 6 days away. Wow. It's next Wednesday, February 23rd. Tickets are free to this thing. eLearnSuccessSeries.com. Go over there, register, grab a free ticket, and come see all of these great speakers that we have who are going to be absolutely killing it and talking about how do we design effective education and engaging education. So the thing that the reason why I wanted to have you on the show today is because you are putting forth a process now that evolves around rewriting the rituals. Yeah, like something that's what you call rewriting the rituals. I think that's really intriguing and super prescient for, again, where we're at in the learning space right now, right? Because so much has been disrupted.
Yep.
And we're just, and let's even just go a little bit. We can expand that bubble to how we even work, right? What do we think about? What's a work schedule? Where do I work? What's my place? What does my team look like, and where are they at? So I'm going to pause there and let you introduce, like, what do you mean by rewriting the rituals?
We have things that we've inherited, whether it's work structures, organizational structures, processes, concepts. We've got all of these things that, have been sort of handed to us along the way. And some of those things are fantastic. Some of those things are also potentially outdated. When I very first wrote my first book, because I'm working on the second one now, one of the things that I was trying to identify, whether it be leaders or anyone, is what gets in the way of people doing effective work. And I learned a ton of things. For example, people said bureaucracy and micromanagement and red tape and excessive layers of approval and, all of these things. I decided I needed a term to encompass all of those things. So I called them muck. So the muck, right? the quicksand, the stuff that slows us down, all of these things, right? So helping people identify what the muck is in their organization or their teams, and then doing something about it. And one of those sources of muck is what I call the dinosaurs. They're the things that we've always done that were handed down to us. And some of those things just flat out either don't work and we need to do something about them, like get rid of them, or we need to find a way to do them differently. Hence, the new model that I'm working with, one of the things is rewriting the rituals. And it's fun because I always try and find parallels in the work that I do and music, right? And I was thinking, when I very first came up with this concept, I was thinking about rituals. And I was thinking about, like, bands, what do they do pre-show? And for example, Aerosmith supposedly always had a spaghetti dinner. The Foo Fighters, what do? They have shots of Jägermeister and they dance to Michael Jackson before a show. That's their thing. And check this out. I recently learned of this crazy ritual where a few singers supposedly, like Kelly Clarkson, Selena Gomez, they drink olive oil before a show. I guess, yeah, it's supposed to be, that's for the vocal cords or something, right? Oh, and it was funny because I thought about these things and I thought, whether it's superstition or in just this belief, they do it because they think it enables their best performance. It's a habit, it's a tradition, it's something that we do because it's going to get me this output. It's going to warm me up to give my best show, put me in the right mental space, etc. We have those rituals at work. And when they were first created, it was created under the assumption that it enables a certain output, right? I do this, I get this. And to your point, the world has changed. And even prior to COVID, COVID definitely changed things, but in my opinion, it exacerbated the situation. We were already seeing a shift to, 4-day work weeks and remote locations and different things across the world. COVID heightened that, but it didn't start there. And so my thought is we've continued to have some of these things that just aren't working. And some of those things, as you and I know, exist in the learning and development, the talent development world. 100%. So in your experience, if we're asking the question, what gets in the way? From an L&D perspective, what do you see as muck? What are obstacles that you and the people you have on the show identify?
Time constraints. That's a big one. So everybody has, no one has time for learning, right? Everyone says they don't have time for learning. Budget is also always a big thing.
Oh yeah.
So externality to the organization, which would be family commitments and those kinds of things. I know a really big one is identifying what learning is necessary, right? And so am I learning a specific skill for a specific task? Am I building a muscle that, is going to be career development and sort of, is this a personal passion kind of thing that I'm developing? What is it, teamwork? So that's just even choosing the learning is muck. And then, just in our space, like the online learning space, there's another system that we have to we now have to maintain. And now I've got to put the learning up there, and I've got to make sure the learning is always current. And then how do I give people access? And then does it work on all these multiple devices? I could go on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of barriers that like they all sound like barriers, but these are all just human problems. Like and before you kind of respond, I just want to put on the table too, just listening to what you're saying, like if there's anything that online learning, but for the people that we've been in for a while, I mean, this has been around since the 90s.
Oh yeah.
But in the last 18 months, suddenly it became a must-have.
Yep.
So that ritual shifted massively, right? So we feel you there.
I'm with you. I was doing virtual training. It was by phone. It was all conference and internet with Cisco WebEx back in like the year 2001. So we've been doing this stuff for a long time.
There was cave paintings then. I'm not sure.
So let's look at some of the things that you mentioned there, because again, I think our challenge is to say, okay, what can we tweak? What simple changes can we make to help, identify those sources of muck and do something about it? Fully acknowledging that we can't solve for everything, right? Let's talk about the time aspect of things. One of the rituals that we have are the myths that we believe about how we use time, about what the best use of time is. And we're seeing that. We're seeing people rewriting those rituals already. They're saying, hey, are 40-hour work weeks really the best way to get work done? And maybe the answer is yes in some scenarios, but in many scenarios, people are learning that they're more productive by having more focused time rather than just, hey, you got to check the box and put in these many hours. I think one of the things that we need to do is rewrite the rituals of some of the myths that we believe. And okay, you and I know that in learning, there's tons of myths, like the learning style stuff. What do we have? The attention thing. Let's talk about that for a minute because it directly ties back to time. Look, we don't have a quote unquote attention problem, in my opinion, right? You had all the attention in the world when you were binge watching Netflix.
I was just going to say, it's just where do you put your attention, right?
Yeah, all of us, you walk into a Starbucks and people are sitting here glued to this thing forever. That's not an attention problem. What we have is an expectation problem. And this manifests itself in two different ways. So let's talk about that. We have created an expectation of availability. We've created this construct where we believe that we've got to be instantly available, instantly accessible via text, via email, via Slack, via TikTok, via chat, all of these things, right? And there's so much research out there that shows us that every single time we touch our phones or we shift our focus away, we're losing valuable time. And we're making it harder to get our actual important work done. From a leadership perspective, we talk about this in my book. We have set up this expectation sometimes where leaders say, we've got to be immediately responsive. Okay, look, that's great. If you're a customer, if you're customer facing, I'm a customer. I love it when they respond immediately. But if I've got a team, especially today in this dispersed world across the world, you're working on something and then bing, boom, bing, you're getting all of these notifications. It's distracting. It's getting in the way of your focus. So this expectation of availability is one of those rituals that we have to rewrite. We've got to say, what is the right effective model for us? What is the best use of our time where I can be available and maybe at certain points, but not constantly distracted? I think the second part of this, and this, look, we've got an expectation of our time being valuable and us being entertained. People say all the time, oh, well, we've got attention gaps. Well, yeah, if something's boring, I'm not going to watch it because I have choices, right? From a learning perspective, we have this expectation of value. And if I'm taking myself away from my work, let's use salespeople, for example. Me coming to training is costing me money.
Sure.
This better darn well be a good use of my time. But from an entertainment standpoint, I think we've got to acknowledge that we're competing with things like Netflix, things like TikTok. We've got to up our production value. We've got to step up and be somehow more engaging, whether that's by using multiple tools in the Zoom environment like breakouts and Mentimeter and chat and stuff like that, or whether it's having practice skill-based sort of application sessions in in-person training, or whether it's just us being in front of people. And here's the absolute truth about it. If you're boring, people are going to tune out. And they've been doing that long before smartphones. We've been
I want to just say that, like, I believe it was, I'm trying to remember the guest that we had on a couple of, it was either 2 or 3 days or whatever, but this is such a great point, and I love how my mind just exploded when we landed on it. It's like, look, I've been going to boring training sessions for 20 years. You know what I mean? And guess what? You used to go to a boring training session, and rather than sort of clicking out Zoom and like doing your email in the background, you'd just do something different, right? You'd bring work to do, you'd open your laptop or whatever, and that's been happening forever.
Yeah.
So yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had some of the best sleep of my life in college. It was crazy because, again, I hate to say we expect to be entertained, and I don't think everyone's got to be this super, charismatic and high energy. I mean, I happen to be, but you can be engaging without having to do all the theatrics or circus acts, right? But we do have to ask ourselves, how are people consuming our product? And is it something that's worthy of their attention? They have it. Will they give it to us? Are we creating the conditions? Are we buying that or providing that value that they choose, that they desire?
Well, how important, I'm one of my passions is language, right? How important would you think it would be, or changing the mindset to move the expectations from I want to be entertained to I just want to be interested? This needs to be interesting because astrophysics is important, right? Physics is important. It makes airplanes go off the ground, right? But we don't necessarily have to have song and dance, right? No. But we can do it in an interesting way.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, does that kind of shift resonate with you?
Yes, it does. And I think there's so many different ways that we could approach that. For example, as a fan of language, we can use the power of storytelling. Mm-hmm. We can use the framing of things to change the way people think about the way we deliver stuff. Let me give you an example. Several years ago, when I was working at a company, we were trying to shift the mindset around our learning solutions, right? We had that ritual, like so many other companies did, of instructor-led training was pretty much all we did. And then there was a smattering of e-learning from time to time, but we were in that place where that was the only modality that we used. And we had kind of a hard sell at the time. For whatever reason, when we were trying to go to more of a blended learning solution, people were a little bit resistant to it because that's the way we've always done it. Let's keep doing it that way. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really helped was telling this story. And I've got this great story that I use sometimes to illustrate this point. What does learning really look like now? Right? How do we actually, on the job, learn and apply skills in the moment? So here's a true story. So my wife and I, about 6 years ago, we had a pretty bad leak in one of our bathrooms. Apparently there had been a water leak going on for weeks, and our kids didn't tell us. And next thing you know, we have this absolute devastation, and it's on the second floor. So, the floor was ruined. It was a mess. We had a choice: pay thousands and thousands of dollars to a restoration company or do it ourselves. Okay. I, at this point in time, had no experience with this type of work. I am not a construction handy dandy kind of dude. I had no knowledge, no skills whatsoever. My wife and I said, well, what do you think? Do it yourself or hire somebody? I said, well, let's hire somebody. She said, let's do it ourselves. So we did it ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah. And so next thing you know, I got to put this into perspective. Rick Lozano has a power saw cutting into walls with no skills, no knowledge, right? We made a fantastic transformation, right? I had zero knowledge, zero skills, but my wife and I were able to convert this bathroom into a brand new sort of, bathroom. How did we do it? Well, first of all, the need was forced. So contextually, this was something we wanted and needed, right? And money was on the line. And we watched YouTube videos. We read blogs. We sort of, educated ourselves by consuming things on demand when we needed it and during the point of need. For example, when I accidentally shocked myself and suddenly realized this might be a problem. So Googling things like, at what point should you go to the hospital after being shocked, that was helpful in the process. But the other thing that we did is we took classes. We went to Home Depot and we learned how to tile at Home Depot. I had practice. I borrowed a friend of mine's tools and I went to my garage and I said, okay, how do I do this stuff? So practice, on-demand resources, cheat sheets, videos, all of those things, the IKEA instructions for how to put together this crazy little cabinet, right? The other thing that we had was a feedback loop. Angela, my wife, was there and she had perspective on things that I didn't. And when she saw things that might need to be addressed, she would tell me in real time. So I was give this example to people. And what does learning look like these days? It looks like that. It looks like this holistic solution where I'm using what I need when I need it at point of need in the way that I want to consume it. So to me, that's what our modern learning solutions should look like. It should at least try to attempt to be a little bit more sort of blended, more holistic and stuff like that. And it was funny because when I told that story in that sort of manner, everyone sort of said, that's totally the way that I do things too. What do you do when you have a question? You Google it. So how do we incorporate all of those different components into the programs that we're developing to help people? So that's one concept on that.
So yeah, I love that. So let me ask you this, and I'm interested to hear your answer on it. Is that one of the things I struggle with? Because what you've just described is everyone's experience, right? I love telling, I go to a dinner party and I say, hey, I'm in the online learning space, and the people are like, oh, what does that mean? I'm like, well, online learning has this broad definition. It's everything like from I know how to do something in a Google spreadsheet, and so what's the first thing you do? You go Google how to do that, and that's how you do a pivot table, right? Two, if I want to learn how to fly an airplane, there's an awful lot of training involved, right? So my question to you is, we have this universe of professional life, especially if I'm thinking about where do I put myself in higher education, how do I continue as a lifelong learner, et cetera, of moving towards expertise. What expert are you going to be? Because very, very few people, except for me, went to college or go to school and say, hey, look, I'm just going to always be a jack of all trades, right?
Yeah.
So is the rule for today that expertise just equals efficiency, right? Because I'll give you the other story that I've always heard tell was, there's the room that has the giant sorting machine and this giant piece of equipment. And it's this is a just in time operation, everything, and one day the machine shuts down and the boss is crazy and like, oh my God, we had to fix this because we're losing millions of dollars every minute. What's going on? And so they call the repairman. And the repairman comes and he said, he looks around and, kind of hems and haws and this and that, and takes out a screwdriver finally after about an hour and goes and adjusts something, and boom, everything's working again.
Yep.
And then the guy, he's like, or he hands him his bill and he kind of walks away. And he's like, wait a second. He's like, this bill's for $10,000. And he's like, well, yeah, of course. And he's like, you were here for 20 minutes. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. He's like, so he scratches it out and he says, the screw that I fixed was $1. Knowing the screw to fix, $9,999, right? I love that one. Like, so put that in perspective for me.
Oh man, there's so many different ways we could go with this. Let's think of a few. So I've got a technology background. I spent most of the last decade working in tech. And you talk about expertise. Sometimes the best expertise is knowing what questions to ask, not necessarily being the expert at the thing itself. But one of the things that you hear from IT people all the time, they ask questions like, have you restarted your computer? And 8 times out of 10, that solves the problem. What's that expertise worth? Well, it fixed your problem. So obviously this guy's worth his salt, or this lady's worth her salt. They're doing the right thing. I think one of the challenges is, and I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction because I think it's relevant to where we're going here. When it comes to expertise, what we also see these days as a challenge is this false competency. People think they're better than they are. This is one of the reasons. So several years back when this organization I was with at the time, they're like, video-based learning. Let's do everything video-based learning. And I said, I love video-based learning. I watch YouTube for everything. That's where I get my information. But the problem with the world that we live in, this world of infinite accessibility information, is I can know anything, right? I can Google it. This is, by the way, how I started my book. I Googled how to be a better leader. And in 1/5 of a second, I had 561 million answers to that question, right? And I think this happens all the time. People say, oh, okay, well, I Googled how to be a better leader. I watched a video on it. I know all this stuff. And somehow we've created this false competency. We have this idea that we're the experts when sometimes we're not. Let me give you an example. My older son, Evan, we were at the time, he was trying to get his driver's license and whatnot. There were all of these online courses. Evan knew how to drive, and he told me so. He was almost like resistant to any feedback because he was like, no, I know all this. But then we get in the car and the dude can't drive. So there's this huge gap between concept and application. And we know this in learning. But one of the things that we also know is if I'm only doing one thing, if I'm doing, for example, video-based learning, we're missing the feedback loop. We're missing the perspective from somebody else who could tell us, hey, there's some things that we're missing here. Maybe there's a way to either, create more expertise or to acknowledge that we're not the experts by creating that awareness. I know that was a long way to answer that question. I think that obviously we all have certain types of expertise. That's the other thing that needs to be recognized, right? Mm. I bring certain things to the table that I am an expert at. There's things that I do naturally, instinctively, and those are the things that we should be leveraging and tapping into when we're developing people. Kind of like our previous conversation about, strengths and zones of excellence. Let's work within people's expertise. Let's also acknowledge that this mass consumption of information sometimes leads to false competency or false expertise. And let's also remind ourselves that one of the most important parts of learning is that practice and that feedback loop. Mm. So when people say, hey, let's rush all to e-learning or let's rush all to video-based learning, cool, let's make it part of the package. But kind of like our previous conversation with the house remodeling stuff, we've got to have that component there too.
Fantastic. I want to remind everyone, I'm live right now with Rick here on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube. If you do have a comment for us or you have an observation or a question, I'd really love to hear, how do you reinvent rituals? Anybody, if you're listening to the recording, put a comment in the chat anyway, because we do read them and we will happy to respond to you and connect with you and talk about those topics as well. I want to move our conversation forward into this reinventing the ritual, sort of rethinking the ritual. Take us through your model, or I don't know, are you going to go for your guitar now? I'm not sure exactly where we're going to go.
I've got a great transition to this. All right. So my new book is called Unlock and Amplify, and it's all about unlocking talent and potential. It builds off the themes in my first book, but it's more about how do we use what we have already to get to our next, great invention, great possibility, what have you. The model that I'm using, and musically, again, I rely on this as sort of a filter and a lens for me because that's where I get my best connections. And music, by the way, I love using it in my work because music is the language of us all. It's this connection point, right? It has this way of bringing people in. Mm-hmm. What I also know as a songwriter, as a musician, is sometimes all you need is a solid foundation. And musically speaking, sometimes that's just a good riff. Maybe like two simple chords. If you think about, for example, Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash. Two simple da 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 da. Two simple chords like that. So I decided let's focus on that foundation, that riff. And the riff stands for rewrite, integrate, focus, and flow. Mm. So those are the 4 buckets in the model. And the rewrite the ritual is where I spend a lot of time. We talked about the muck earlier. And one of the things that you and I both know is that sometimes we don't have a choice. Sometimes we have to do certain things. So if we don't have the option of getting rid of it, let's at least make small little modifications to rewrite that ritual so that it enables the output it's supposed to enable. Okay? Let me give you an example. The muckiest of muck, the thing that everyone loves to hate, performance reviews.
Ooh.
That's the reaction we get from everybody. Okay. Let's put this.
The funny part about performance reviews too is nobody likes them. I was an evaluator for a long time. Nobody likes doing them, and nobody likes being the manager who has to do them, right? Like that. Neither side likes them.
It sucks for everybody. I mean, it totally does. So here's some. So I've got very strong feelings, but let's get rid of the feelings for a second and focus on data. Okay. It was this one study that I found incredibly insightful. They interviewed thousands of people. Okay, and I'll give you the source here in a minute. What they found: 93% of the thousands of people in this one survey do some sort of performance review. Okay. Out of those thousands of people, only 49%, less than half, said that their performance reviews accurately appraised, guess what? Performance. More than half of the people said it didn't work. And by the way, this survey came from SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management. The people, the department who usually owns this function, is saying that it doesn't work.
Interesting.
Okay, there's also a bottom line here from a dollar standpoint. There was one estimate that said that a company with 5,000 people, when you factor in all the time and salary, the average company of 5,000 people is going to spend $1.5 million on a process that doesn't necessarily work. And by the way, I don't like to speak in absolutes. In some cases, people have success. And if that's the case, cool. But in many cases, we've got to rewrite this ritual because it's not working.
Right.
One other thought, and this one's the kicker for me. Gallup did another survey on this, and they found that only 14% of people after their performance review were inspired to perform better. But here was the kicker. Even people who got great performance reviews weren't happy with them. Now, why would that be, right? So it's like, wait a minute, you got a great review. Why are you angry? Well, usually the answer is because it was tied to pay. And so they're like, hey, you just gave me this great review, and now I'm not getting squat for a raise. Of course, I'm going to be angry. Okay. That's a lot of, I get really passionate about this, but
I love it.
Look, here's the thing. We've got an opportunity to rewrite this ritual to make it more effective. Let me give you an example of somebody who's doing just that. Okay. There's this organization that I work with. They're called CodeUp. CodeUp is a small company, and what they do is help, develop coding skills so that people can develop careers in technology. What CodeUp has done is they've realized, man, there's so much baggage with performance reviews. How can we rewrite this ritual to make it work? Okay, well, let's start with the question, what's the point? The point is to help people perform better, hopefully to grow, to be successful in their organization. So they changed the name. They changed the name to GPS, which stands for Grow, Perform, and Succeed. So they did several things that were key to making this a successful project. In addition to sort of changing the mindset about it, and to you, you're a fan of language, changing the name around it. They made it less formal, more frequent. And what they did in their assessments, they streamlined it, made it really simple. So rather than that whole, write 10 pages of your self-evaluation junk, which, yeah, that was always an interesting exercise. They focused on one question. And the question is, what makes your job hard? That's it. That's it. So I sit down, I do my GPS, I come up with this answer of, okay, what makes my job hard? I bring that into my GPS, my performance review, and we focus on that. Shouldn't all performance reviews focus on that rather than it being punitive, rather than it being tied to pay? And oh, by the way, that's the other thing they did. They got rid of the rating system altogether. So there wasn't that fear of that. So to me, that was a really great example of rewriting the ritual with something that most companies have to do some form of, but they made it simple, they made it accessible, and it was all focused on helping people do better work by eliminating the muck.
Oh, and I'm interested in since you've worked with CodeUp, how much has this process become a part of their culture, right? Because if you remove that performance review thing, that expectation, and you have this other process, this other ritual that does that blend into, hey, this is what it means to be a part of the CodeUp family, the CodeUp team, whatever. Is there a real tangible feeling there?
Yes, there is. Now, let's put this in context. They're a growing organization. The opportunities for them to get muckier as they grow, that's always a possibility. But one of the things that they did was they also embodied what's known as the EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. So there's this book called Traction by Gino Wickman, and it's this framework for how companies can operate as sort of like you and I, like entrepreneurs. What do entrepreneurial small businesses need? And what they have in this EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, are some very simple tools, such as IDS. IDS stands for Identify, Discuss, Solve. And during every meeting, you have an IDS around one thing. You identify, you discuss, solve. Another thing that they have is simple plus and minus sort of, did we accomplish our goal? It's either a plus, a minus, or a plus minus, which is the one you don't want because then there's a little bit of ambiguity. Now, I say all that to say they incorporate these principles out of a need for simplicity. The GPS, in conjunction with that, mirrors that sort of value, that value for simplicity, for doing the work in the simplest, most effective ways. So again, rather than this elaborate performance review, you've got a simple question. What makes work hard? You solve for that.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does sort of bookend that entire sort of model that they've adopted. It's part of their culture.
Mm. So take me to the next place. Like, what do we do in order to start this rewriting process, or do you want to go to the integration process? We talked about rewriting. Like, do we want to talk about integration and focus, or I'm not sure what's your next move?
So we can integrate simple questions, right? One of those questions is, what is the need? And when I use that term, the need, it's an acronym. It's negotiate, eliminate, automate, delegate. So in our process, let's ask the question, what can be negotiated? Kind of like code up in their performance reviews. What can be eliminated? Like, what can we just get rid of? Mm-hmm. And you'd be amazed at how much there's really simple things that you can just say, we do this. Let's just stop. There's power in that. What can be automated? Of course, in the technology world, that's becoming simpler and simpler. The trick with automation is to not give up that time and devote it to something else that's also muck. And then finally, what can be delegated? And when I think about delegation, a lot of people say, okay, well, that means pushing your work off on somebody else. It's not the way I think of it. When I think about delegation, I think of what can I give somebody to enable them to do better work, right? How do I rewrite the ritual? By giving them something. And the simplest thing we can give anybody is trust.
Mm.
I'll get out of the way. I'm going to tell you sort of what the guardrails are. I'm going to define the parameters, and I'm going to get out of the way. So need, negotiate, eliminate, automate, delegate. We can implement that simple framework into our process to help rewrite the ritual. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. And so now take me to the 2 Fs. I know we're coming up on our time here. We're already 45 minutes in this conversation. It's amazing how quickly it goes, and I don't miss your song. So I'm trying.
We'll get to that.
How do I get to your music?
All right. Well, we'll that's actually a great transition. Okay. The focus and the flow parts, right? Mm-hmm. We've talked about a little bit of this, right? Let's rewrite that expectation of availability so that I'm actually focusing on the things that provide value. Let's also rewrite sort of the norms around what we consider value and not. Let's also simplify. One of the things that I hear everywhere, people say this all the time, we're being asked to do more with less. You hear it everywhere. People say we're being asked to do more with less. And very often when people are asked to do more with less, what they try to do to make up for that is they go, okay, we got to double down. We got to put in more hours. We've got to work harder, people. And you know what? That may work short term, but long term, that's not sustainable. That's a horrible solution. The way that we do more with less, and it's so funny because it's so simple, is do less. Mm. Do less. The way that you get more done in a 4-day work week is by getting rid of all of this muck and doing less work. And in my first book, I've got several examples of companies who are doing just that. They're saying, hey, we're being asked to do more with less. Let's look at what we're doing and eliminate some of these things altogether. And let's put our attention where it actually matters, and let's depend on everyone so that we focus on the right things. Okay, so there's some thoughts on that. And there's going to be a lot more in the book, but the last part is flow. And flow to me is the fun part because it speaks to that need for us to operate in that area where we're just great, right? One of the stories that I tell in the book, because it's really fun for me and it opened up a lot of doors, I tell the story of PFM. And I'll tell you what PFM means here in a minute. The short version of this story is this. I had a leader who changed my life. Totally changed my life, totally changed my career. Didn't even know they were doing it at the time, but they had that impact on me. And this leader, his name is Larry. Larry knew this whole concept of focusing people rather than trying to fix people. And he gave me a favor. He gave me an opportunity. He said, Rick, you're great at 3 things. I was like, really? That's it? He said, yes, 3 things. That's it. You're a great speaker. You're a great facilitator. You're a great musician. Do those 3 things. Mm-hmm. I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. He said, I'm telling you, bring your guitar to work. And I'm like, okay, how do I make that good? What does that look like on my performance review, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the conversation, he says, PFM, man, PFM. It's like, what's PFM? He says, pure freaking magic.
Yeah.
Pure freaking magic.
Yeah.
Fast forward to my career being totally changed because I started doing those 3 things. Now, those weren't the only things I did because, I got to do some back end stuff too. But I started using music as a tool, as a lens, as both a lens and a filter. And what I mean by that is when I look at the world through the lens of a musician, I find connections that I otherwise wouldn't. Acoustic leadership, the name of the book, is coming from music. The riff, the model that I'm now working with, comes from music, and things just sort of make sense. And the other reason there's power there is because, like we said, there's an emotional connection with people. So he gave me this idea of PFM and said, do it. And it was so funny because when I started thinking like a musician, everything changed. And yes, here's where we have the transition to the guitar. I started bringing my guitar to work, and it was just so much fun for me. One of the things that I do naturally and easy is I write songs. And some of them are good and some of them are not. But I had so much fun. And this one, by the way, this one just popped out. And it was, it's one of those songs that suddenly I wrote, and it was just like, wow, I love that feeling when it just comes out. And it has to do with our favorite subject, performance reviews. All right. So we also know, by the way, we know that sometimes the best learning comes from bad examples. So this is an example of how not to do a performance review. Here's hopefully one you've never heard. All right, here we go. Writing your performance review. It says more about me than you. It's morally defeating and often misleading, but this is the best we can do. So here we go. I haven't said this all year, but now you're about to hear about that thing last November that you don't remember. That's not how we do things around here, just so we're clear. Now between you and me, this year everyone's rated a 3. Successful. And the budget is tight, and that team building night really cost us. Top golf ain't free. No, it's not. But I want you to know that I value your contributions to this organization. You are creating synergies with our stakeholders and optimizing efficiencies. You're knocking it out of the park. I love you, man. And in light of all this praise, here's your 0.5% raise. I hope you enjoyed your performance review. The performance review song.
Oh yes, excellent. That was awesome. That was absolutely fantastic.
You know what's funny about that too is every time I do that, most of the people in the audience are like, oh, I've totally had that performance review. I know exactly what that feels like because
every single year. Absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
It's funny because it's true. Yeah.
So to wrap this up.
Okay.
If I want to start rewriting the rituals, or I'm a leader, I'm either in the C-suite, or I'm a manager, or I'm I'm a dean at a school, or even if I'm a professor on a committee.
Yep.
What's my first step? Like, what do I do? Do I raise my hand? Do I just start doing it? Do I make a proposal? Do I get real disruptive? What do I do?
There's no one right answer to this, but one thing to focus on is one thing. Focus on one thing. Do one little thing. Make that tiny little change. There's power in these simple little changes, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We could just change the spoke a little bit. Do one little thing, right? Microsoft Japan, check this out. One little thing that they did. So they went to a 4-day work week. They also, in the process of working less, found a 40% improvement in their productivity, the hard word. They were more productive working fewer days. And one simple thing that they did to rewrite the ritual was they changed their meeting length. Most meetings are an hour in a lot of cases. They said 30 minutes max. So suddenly people were spending less time in meetings, meaning the meetings had to be more efficient, more focused. They got more done by doing less. And it was one simple thing.
Wow.
So that would be my encouragement. Focus on one simple thing. Ask that question. What's the need? What can be eliminated, negotiated, automated, delegated? And it doesn't have to be rocket science. It can be something really simple. And by the way, as a leader, you know who's got all the answers to this? Your people.
Sure.
Ask them. They will tell you what the muck. They will tell you the things that we have opportunities for. And it's not an insult to you. Don't take it personally, but do something about it. Make one simple change.
RickLozano.com. That's where everybody finds you.
Yep.
This has been an absolutely lovely conversation. The first song that we've ever had on any podcast or any hot seat I've ever done. The first, we need more of that. Definitely need more of that. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I hope that we get to talk with you again. I hope that, pardon me. I hope we'll be able to see you on the stage at one of our sessions.
Yes, I love that.
This year. And thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And thanks everyone for listening.